Hello class, welcome to week 3 of Healthcare Leadership. We're going to be discussing chapters 5 and 6 tonight, where we're going to talk about leading with strategic intelligence and profound knowledge and changing healthcare systems with systems thinking. And while I'm thinking about it, don't forget that you also have to participate in discussion board 3, complete assignment 3, and there is a quiz number 3 to take this week to complete what it is that you have to do. So let's talk about leading with strategic intelligence and profound knowledge. And as you have seen in this textbook, our author likes to give us definitions to talk about, give some depth to the chapter that we're discussing. And the first thing he talks about is that leadership needed to make a complex health organization, a learning organization, requires collaboration amongst leaders throughout the organization. And to be able to do that, you take a look at figure 5.1 of your textbook on page 62, and he's got a figure there, an exhibit that talks about foresight, visioning, partnering, and motivating. And the reason he's discussing that is because these are the things that are required for you to become a good leader. You have to have the ability to communicate with others by having the ability to take these 4 types of characteristics and make them work for you. So, for example, foresight, perception of the significance of events for your organization before they have occurred, based on your subject matter expertise, experience, research, scanning, and ability to sense dynamic trends. That's where it all starts. You have to have the ability to kind of see what's happening within your organization before you can formulate a vision and gather up partners and motivate everybody to do what's correct. But you notice that in the center circle of this strategic intelligence figure that he's talking about, it's referred to as leadership philosophy and profound knowledge. And all of these things surround that circle. The next step is visioning. After you have gotten your foresight, you gather a vision. This is where you design the future of the organization as a learning organization that can innovate and take account of the trends identified by foresight that indicate threats or opportunities for the organization. And then, after you do that, you can partner with people, establish productive relationships both internally and externally based on mutual trust, common philosophy, and the sharing of risks and rewards. And then the motivating factor is the last thing that you do after you have gathered your foresight, envisioned what you're going to do, and partnered with other individuals. You're going to motivate them to make everything happen. And you do that by engaging people's intrinsic motivation, by providing the reasons for people to help to realize the vision. Define motivating relationships, responsibilities, rewards, and recognition for contributions made to the organization. And last but not least, our author says that leaders should also be able to model learning from the organization's results and to make sure that of this learning and anticipating future trends. So let's consider briefly how each of these skills contributes to effectiveness in leading change of healthcare organizations. So the next thing he talks about are internal and external questions that you should be asking yourself that fall under the category of foresight. And relative to the external questions, he asks questions like, these are the things you should be asking yourself. What changes are taking place in the global healthcare community? How will these changes impact our delivery of care in the future? What changes are taking place in the political and economic environments in which we operate? How will these changes impact the ways in which we operate? 3, what changes in technology could impact how we match the needs of our patients and families in the future? 4, will future needs of patients change the way we currently deliver care? 5, what will be the changes in the number of types of our competitors? 6, what will the changes in our suppliers and their offerings? 7, what changes are we observing in the external environment that can be brought in and adapted to our organization to improve the quality and effectiveness of care delivered to our patients? So those are the things that your foresight is trying to gather that are external of your organization. Then you switch to the internal questions to ask of the current organization. What services will be required in the future? What changes will this require of our organization? What human resources will be required in the future? What changes will be required in the future in terms of capital and financial resources? And last, what have we learned from the results and experiences that suggest future needs, opportunities, and challenges? So read that in detail on pages 63 through 64, and then pick up on the section where Our author talks about visioning as designing the idealized organization. He tells you how to partner with people. He even has some charts there and figures for partnering. Shows you how to do that and with whom. And then he changes gears and then goes into profound knowledge. So he talks about how do leaders develop foresight? Well, they scan the environment by communing with experts and attending meetings where they present new ideas, reading about new technology, techniques, and legislation. They develop scenarios about possible futures and work on contingency plans, and they join groups from other healthcare organizations that share findings. They serve on boards of exemplary organizations in healthcare-related fields. This helps them to vision and idealize design. And the author goes on to tell us that there are 3 criteria for idealizing the design of an organization. That of technological feasibility, operational viability, and learning adaptation. Technological feasibility is where the design should not incorporate any technology not currently known to be feasible. That's something that you want to be thinking about, that you're not making plans that are things that you're not capable of doing from a lot of different reasons, not the least of which is having enough money to do it with. Operational viability. This is where the organization should be designed to be capable of surviving in the current environment. You don't want to be going off and trying to create a new environment and build upon the current one if the current environment is not able to survive what it is that you're doing right now. And last but not least, learning and adaptation. The organization should be designed so as to be able rapidly to learn from and adapt to its own successes and failures and those of relevant others. Now, after you go through this idealized design 3 criteria and ask yourself those questions, you'll be able to design a vision within your mind that has to do with developing and communicating this information. This will be done and developed by the leadership of the organization. It should be communicated, understood, and shared by the organization. It should be comprehensive and detailed, and it should be presented within a time frame of actions that will move the organization toward the ideal future. And our author shows you, let me see what page that this is in. He's got another figure here called partnering, called the partnering continuum, figure 5.2. Where he shows you an axiom where you've got the value versus trust. And this is trying to demonstrate to you how you partner with people by finding a commodity supplier, then a preferred supplier, then a value-added supplier. And once you reach that point, you should be able to build an alliance with that partner, and then you have a strategic partnership. But it doesn't always happen overnight. You have to always determine what the value is of people that you're doing business with, and you can only do that by establishing a certain trust factor. So that is the partnering continuum and how you go up a chain of events that will help you to partner with other people. Our author then talks about motivation and how that's important to the process of leadership as well. And he says that we are all motivated by internal needs and drives. We are motivated to eat, sleep, work, and have fun. Work ties us to the real world that tells us whether or not our ideas make sense, and it demands that we discipline our talents and master our impulses. Motivation helps us to realize our potentials. We must focus them in a way that relates to others. We need to feel needed. Our sense of dignity and self-worth depends on being recognized by others through our work. Without our work, we begin to deteriorate. So with motivation, it helps us to work. It tells us that we need to work and we need to make a contribution to our work so we stay motivated. The challenge for leaders is to direct people's internally driven motivation, the extreme intrinsic motivation to work and contribute to realize their vision. So that's what motivation is all about. Then he goes on to explain what profound knowledge is, and again, a figure found on page 69 of this chapter, figure 5.4, shows you that in this scope that we're looking at here, the looking glass, the profound knowledge is comprised of systems thinking, understanding variation, psychology, and theory of knowledge. And by bringing all these full circle and interacting them together, it will help you to become a better leader. So read about profound knowledge and understanding these systems on page 69. There's good information about understanding variation also, why that's important for a leader to understand that there will be variation within organizations that you'll need to be aware of to help you make decisions. But you need to first be able to recognize them and be able to interpret them and understand what it is that you're seeing. So understanding what it is that you're dealing with day in and day out is very important information. So in summary, remember that this chapter focuses on the 5 parts of strategic intelligence that we discussed, that of foresight, visioning, partnering, and motivating and empowering. And also the 4 parts of profound knowledge for leaders that we have overviewed: theories of systems, understanding variation, understanding psychology, and theory knowledge. Those are all listed in the back of the chapter. So that takes us to Chapter 6, Changing Healthcare Systems with Systems Thinking. Now, there are some stories that are located throughout the chapters in this textbook that kind of give you an idea of what this particular chapter is going to be about. And the lead-in story for Chapter 6, Changing Healthcare Systems with Systems Thinking, talks about a doctor of a hospital group in Asia who had been finished reading a book on systems thinking, and she was intrigued by the prospect of applying systems thinking to healthcare. So she decided to call in a person who had just finished a project as an improvement professional, and went to a seminar that was teaching the teachings and beliefs of Dr. W. Edwards Deming and his ideas of an organization viewed as a system as opposed to an organization. So what you're going to learn about in this particular chapter is that organizations are considered to be social systems that are comprised of the 4 Ps. These help us to define a social system. The 4 Ps are purpose, processes, people, and practical values. The purpose, what is the purpose for our organization? That's what we ask ourselves. Who are we serving? What value do we add for them? When we look at our processes, we ask ourselves, how are our work processes linked to make the system achieve its purpose effectively and efficiently? What do we measure? When we ask about our people, what are the roles and responsibilities we need to fill, and what kinds of people do we need to fill them? What are the skills that they need to have? What should they do when they interact with each other? What kinds of personality traits are we looking for? What kinds of relationships do we need to manage? And last but not least, the practical values that define a social system are, the question we ask ourselves is, what are our values and how do they support the system's purpose? So, to further define systems thinking, we have the definition of a social system, which is a collection of interdependent processes and other elements with people working interactively, guided by practical values to accomplish the purpose of the system. So essentially what we've done is taken those 4 Ps and consolidated them into a definition. And you can see what that looks like by looking at the figure of 6.2, an organization viewed as a system, and 6.1, transforming an organization focused to a healthcare system. Both of those charts are listed there for you. There's figures that show you what system thinking is all about. Study those a little bit and see if it is that you can understand what it is that our author is trying to get you to understand, which is that our organizations are a lot more than just looking at an organization chart, a bunch of boxes that tells us where people are and what they do. Our organizations are based on the 2 figures that you see in these figures that I'm talking about, figures 6.1 and 2 on pages 80 and 81 in chapter 6, where a social system is described, and he shows you what support processes look like versus the chart that we were talking about previously. When you understand that an organization is a system, you need to begin to understand what interdependence is. This is where each member of a 4-person bowling team improves his or her average by 10 pins. What would be the impact on the team score? Well, each of 4 department managers in the healthcare organization carries out changes that cut monthly costs by $10,000 in his or her department. What is the monthly savings to the organization? If you're going to become interdependent, you need to look at those types of questions and see if you can seek out the answers. But again, you're going to be looking at processes versus systems. A process is a set of causes and conditions that repeatedly come together in a sequence of steps to transform inputs into outcomes. And then again, when you place that side by side, the beginning and the end of a process, usually over a period of time, we also again have to look at the 4 Ps of a social system to compare it to process. A social system versus process. The social system is the 4 Ps. The process itself is a set of causes and conditions that repeatedly come together in a sequence of steps. So you've got processes versus the people, the practical values, the processes, the purposes that make up a social system. Concept of a process is also listed for you in figure 6.5 on page 85. And if you ask the author what does this mean, he goes on to say that all work can be described as a process. A process can be defined as a set of causes and conditions that repeatedly come together in a sequence of steps to transform inputs into outcomes. And in figure 6.5, you've got a chart there that shows you what he's talking about. This is a flow diagram that usually has a beginning and an end with activities and decisions over a piece of time. It begins with inputs, it ends with outcomes, but in the middle there are stages that are the transformative periods that you've got to look at to see what's happening within an organization. And these are the things that leaders do. Now, there also are 10 simple rules for delivery systems, which are listed for you again in your checkbook and your textbook, which are table 6.1. And this is the Institute of Medicine's 10 simple rules for delivery systems. Anytime that you are developing a delivery system, you take a look at current practice versus what you want to do to improve practice. And it gives you examples. In the current practice, you say our care is based primarily on visits. In an improved practice, as an effective leader, you would say care is going to be based on continuous healing relationships. And then there's a whole chart there the Institute of Medicine has developed 10 rules comparing current practice versus improved practice and how you can go from current practice to an improved state. So take a look at that and digest that and understand how that helps to define a systems thinking or learning organization. Part of the process also for becoming an effective leader is being able to do a comparison of analysis and systems thinking. On page 93, the author defines a system for us. Defining the boundary of your system is important because the boundary differentiates the system from other systems. This boundary provides focus, helps to define important relationships, and helps leaders to identify potential partners, internal and external to your organization. And with that, you're going to be able to get to that stage, you're going to look at the stages of comparison of analysis and systems thinking. And you can find an example of that on table 6.2 on page 697 in your textbook, where the author has the first column listed as a method of inquiry, the second column is analysis, and the third column is that of systems thinking. So the method of inquiry, if you look at the first stage, the analysis is where you're going to break into parts the whole to which it is to be explained, and the systems thinking approach is going to be where the system is identified and considered as a whole. So you go through the first stage, second, third stage, to get you right down to the end of the chart where it talks about results and understanding what it is that you've been analyzing. And essentially what you're trying to do is analyzing information that's going to help you to become a better leader, and you should be able to do that to help you establish two basic types of change that you need to be aware of. Now, on the bottom of page 97 that follows after that table we were just talking about, there are two basic types of change of a system, that of reactive change and that of fundamental change. Reactive change is a change that reacts to process within a part of the system that does not change the other parts or the system as a whole. This includes routine changes required to keep the organization running. Reactive changes can be characterized by the following attributes. They solve problems or react. They return the system to prior condition. They trade off among measures and increasing quality while increasing costs, and they have a short-term impact. Versus the other type of change, which is fundamental, which transforms the system, which can involve changing its purpose or its parts in a way that changes how system components interact to produce results. Fundamental changes include design or redesign of some aspect of a system that's necessary for improvement beyond problems, fundamentally alters the system and what people do. It impacts several measures in a positive direction, increasing quality while also reducing costs, and this is a long-term impact versus a short-term impact like reactive change is. So read about that starting on page 97 and continuing over to the next 3 pages. We then come to constraints and guidelines for removing constraints. And if you want to become a good leader, you've got to recognize that there are going to be constraints within an organization that are going to allow you to either impede leverage or have leverage within an organization. You can also recognize where there are bottlenecks happening within the organization that are slowing down your processes, that are not allowing your organization to learn and go forth, and you to be a good leader. So the author outlines guidelines for removing constraints. This is where you identify the system's constraints. You prioritize all your constraints according to their impact on your goals. This is where you decide how to exploit the system's constraints. You will manage all other resources to supply all that the constraints will consume. And 3, you subordinate everything else to the decisions in step 2. Number 4, you elevate the constraints of the system. And 5, if a constraint is broken in the previous steps, you go back to the beginning and start all over again. So that conversation begins on page 98, and again, it's all intended to help you to become a better leader. So it behooves you to read this information and get a better understanding of it. It's all about leading us to the next and last chess systems on people improving behaviors. And to be able to improve behaviors as a leader, you need to understand that sometimes there are things that can help us. And one of those things that is referred to as attribution theory. Attribution theory describes the tendency for observers to underestimate situational influences and overestimate individual motives and personality traits as the cause of behavior. So one of the things that Dr. W. Edwards Deming used to say is a fault in the interpretation of observations seen everywhere is to suppose that every event, whether it be a defect, a mistake, or an accident, is attributable to someone, usually the one nearest at hand, or is related to some special event. But the fact is that most troubles with service and production lie within the system. And when you're looking at attribution theory, what that does is it explains where to find problems, that once you're able to do that, it will help you to become a better leader because you'll be able to break up those bottlenecks and move things through the system the way that they're supposed to. So at the bottom of page 100, you can read about attribution theory. It'll tell you that leaders must do the following. They must celebrate and bury the past, build the will to change the present, to find a positive vision for the future. He goes on to tell us that leaders need to develop a communication plan to explain why what worked in the past no longer applies, why the challenges of the present require attention and must be changed, and how future challenge will be addressed by the changes realized by the idealized vision of the system. And that's where W. Edwards Deming came into play many, many years ago because he was such an effective scientist in this regard. He knew systems inside and out, and he had studied for so many years that he could recognize where the problems were. It wasn't always necessarily related to, like he said, the person that was nearest at hand, or a defect, or a mistake, or an accident. It's usually something in the system that is causing the problem. So again, what leaders must do: celebrate and bury the past, build the will to change the present, define a positive vision for the future. So to summarize this chapter, the definition of a system is the 4 P's as a foundation. This is where we have processes, people, practical values, and a purpose. Excuse me. Don't forget that transforming the organization means moving from the organization chart view to viewing the organization as a system. Don't forget that W. Edward Deming's organizational viewed as a system can be used as a template to develop a conceptual view of your system. Deming's diagram demonstrates 3 types of processes that you'll find in this chapter: mainstay, driver, and support. Study those and understand what those are. Number 4, in summary, systems are made up of work processes. All work is a process. Understanding work as a process is an essential skill for everyone in the system. Number 5, when making changes, it is essential to understand the difference between detail and dynamic complexity. Number 6, leaders need to appreciate the difference between analysis and systems thinking, the role of synthesis and consideration of the whole system before attempting analysis. And 7, the attribution error can lead to blaming people for systemic causes. And that essentially is our 2 chapters for this week 3. A lot of information there to digest, but again, don't get wrapped around the axle and all the details. Kind of take a look at the embedded PowerPoint slides that pretty much go hand in hand with what it was that I used to give this presentation tonight. and that will keep you focused on the most important information found in these 2 chapters. So again, thanks for your attention, and I hope everything has come together for you as far as the course goes. The work that I'm seeing so far that you've posted in the discussion board and the assignments that you've submitted has been very well done. I think that you have grasped the information very well. And so if I don't hear from you again anytime this week, and you know how to contact me via email or telephone me directly, have a good week, and I will see you again with our week 4 video. So I will talk to you then. Have a good week. Bye-bye.